So, first of all, welcome back from your weekends. I have this rule that I've kind of piled up over the years of many decades of journalism now, which is that if I have a choice between a conspiracy theory and a theory that mostly relies on incompetence, and I bet on incompetence, I'll be right somewhere around 85 to 90% of the time. Incompetence is much more prevalent in human affairs than conspiracies are. Secrets are very hard to keep, and conspiracies, of course, require secrets. So usually when people are spouting conspiracy theories, I just say, no, really, you should just believe that a lot of things happen just because people aren't paying attention or they're not good at their jobs or both. With the suicide of Jeffrey Epstein, though, it's been very hard for me to enforce my own rule. There are so many things about it that seem both completely improbable and also, in another way, probable. We're going to talk about that in the first segment here. Let me just alert you to the fact that in the second segment, we're going to talk about almost going to do the anatomy of a photo, specifically a photo taken of Donald and Melania Trump and a baby and two other people in El Paso. How a picture like that comes to be, and what you can read into it and what you can pull out of it. And then at the end of the show, we're going to talk about a beloved independent movie theater that is now up for sale and of the difficulties of running an independent movie theater that shows high-quality films in the age of Netflix and its kind. But yes, as promised, we'll begin with Jeffrey Epstein. You probably woke up on Saturday morning, fumbled around a little bit, and pretty early in your morning found out that Jeffrey Epstein, accused of so many sexual misconducts and the procuring of young women for sex, had died in custody from an apparent suicide. Joining us now is Carol Leonnig, investigative reporter for The Washington Post. And thank you so much. I know you've had a very, very long and busy weekend. Thanks for finding some time for us today.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. And I share your general predilection to avoid the conspiracy theory and yet be pulled to puzzle over this one.
Right. And I think one place to start, and it's something that you've emphasized, is that, the reason that he was for a while on suicide watch was because of an incident at the end of July. I think it was July 23rd. Although he denied, as I understand it, that he had made a suicide attempt. He used the word attacked, didn't he?
Yes, that's right. When we first heard about this, we thought it was bizarre. I was talking to a source who said, "Can you believe this? Epstein either tried to kill himself or he was attacked." Later, we learned that he had said he had been attacked and that his roommate, he suspected, was the person who did it. His roommate was an accused former police officer accused of 4 murders, which was an interesting person to put in a cell with Jeff Epstein, the most high-profile prison inmate in the entire federal system. But we'll put that aside for a second. Anyway, July 23rd, that he's found sort of semi-conscious on the floor of his cell. He says these neck marks are caused by some mysterious attacker. And his roommate says, "I found him here. I think he tried to kill himself." That's paraphrasing, of course. But it should have put prison officials on notice that something was amiss, that either he was trying to kill himself or he was in danger.
Well, they seem to have done the amiss thing for a while, right? He was on suicide watch, and then suddenly he wasn't.
Well, they did put him on suicide watch on the 23rd out of concern about this. And then they took him off. We are told, something around 6 days later, after a series of psych evals, after he had met with his attorneys numerous times, he'd spent hours and hours with them going over the evidence in the case, other issues that had to do with how it came to be that he was charged after getting a plea agreement that he wouldn't be charged. So they were going back and forth about this, and then he was taken off suicide watch. He had an inmate, a cell inmate sort of bunker for another couple days after that. And then that roommate was taken out of his room, and then he was found dead.
Right. And so all of us have been trying to understand what standard procedure is in these situations. One of the things we're being told is that in the case of a suicide risk, it is typical to have a roommate there or a fellow inmate there simply, for those reasons, for the reporting reasons, and also so the person has somebody to talk to. This seems to be one of the many things that wasn't followed here.
Yes, I guess logically it makes sense to have a roommate for that reason. On the other hand, if your roommate is accused of killing 4 people, maybe it wouldn't be the best choice. I don't, it's just curious, very curious. And, now people are saying, was he killed? Wasn't he? There were a lot of secrets this man had. There were a lot of things he could have said to investigators as part of some deal of cooperation. I'm not saying that somebody had him whacked, to use the Sopranos parlance, but it is really curious. The other really curious thing is, if you have protocols, why not follow them? If you know that this is a high-profile guy, let's be more safe. If you know that pedophiles and accused pedophiles are more likely of being killed and more likely of killing themselves, that's another red flag.
Right. It just, I saw that you had, I think, retweeted George Conway, one half of The World's Strangest Marriage, but also a big critic of the Trump administration, who said, I'll paraphrase, this guy should not have been allowed to do a poop without someone watching him. Preet Bharara, former federal prosecutor, says there should be and almost certainly is video of Epstein's suicide at MCC, that's the Metropolitan Correctional Center. One hopes that it's complete, conclusive, and secured. Well, George Conway did not get his wish, obviously. This guy wasn't being watched all the time. And it appears, we don't really know yet, but the New York Post has reported that there's not any video. Do you know any more about that, Carol Lenning, about whether there is possibly video?
Our reporters have been told that it is unlikely that there will be video that went directly into his cell, meaning fixed in some imagery on him and the location of this contraption by which he appeared to have hung himself, but that there is plenty of video that was of the area around the cell. The question is does the video exist outside the cell that shows any activity that's relevant? These are big questions, and we're told that authorities are now trying to sort through that.
Now, this all happened really within, 24, 36, something like that, hours of the release of this huge tranche of documents related to Epstein's case. Maybe you could just kind of give us a little bit of a sense of, I know there's a lot in those documents, and I don't know if we even know yet how much there is in those documents, but give us a sense of what those are.
That is part of why this was such a House of Cards bizarre moment for us reporters working on this. A team of us were alerted sort of actually, now that I think about it, it was before noon, that the Second Circuit was going to unseal, the Federal Appeals Court in New York was going to unseal a series of records. It was in the thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. And we reviewed all of them together as a team, divvying them up into tranches to review. They were mostly about depositions of people who accused Jeffrey Epstein and his girlfriend, Miss Maxwell, of trafficking them, of finding ways to bring women en masse into Jeffrey's home, to his island in the British Virgin Islands, to his Palm Beach house, to his New York apartment, all for massages that ended up being sexual in nature, sometimes oral sex, other kinds of sex, and that they describe a sex trafficking arrangement in which women were provided to Jeffrey Epstein multiple times a day for his sexual gratification. They also describe many of these women being provided as being, 14 years old, 15 years old, 16 years old, which was really worrisome. And one of the depositions is from Virginia Roberts, whose claims are disputed by Miss Maxwell and also by Mr. Epstein. They were. She says she was directed to have sex with all sorts of important and powerful people at the instruction of Mr. Epstein's sort of right-hand woman, Miss Maxwell. People like, the claims were fantastical sounding. She was ordered to have sex with a prince, a foreign leader, Bill Richardson, a former senator, George Mitchell, a former senator. Where it's unclear if those claims are true, but those were the things that were in the record. And then we're all woken up Saturday morning that the person she's making the claims about is dead.
Right. So now, I mean, obviously, the people who were the young women who were the accusers of Jeffrey Epstein will not get the satisfaction of seeing him in court, seeing their claims pursued with him. That doesn't mean that their claims can't be pursued. I mean, I would assume that the focus turns, at least the prosecutorial focus, would turn to Miss Maxwell, who would be answerable for a lot of this stuff.
She seems very natural next target. I don't know that she is, but she seems like the natural next person based on what the accusers claim. And the only problem with all of that is if you have a conspiracy, it's good to have some testimony from a member of it about the agreement that they were making, the network for sex trafficking that they were allegedly setting up. And with the death of Mr. Epstein, you've lost a critical witness to what these women say they experienced.
I mean, there's a whole other set of questions, and I don't know if they'll ever be investigated on a prosecutorial basis about where Jeffrey Epstein's money came from. There isn't really a narrative that makes a whole lot of sense. The amount of money that he seemed to be shifting around into different accounts and stuff, it doesn't really have any kind of obvious trajectory. Is this something, is there any potential for trying to understand that at some point, or will that be just sort of let go of as a result of what happened on Saturday?
I think it really depends a lot on how much money is involved, how seriously the federal investigators believe they have evidence of wrongdoing. You know, he's been accused of Ponzi schemes, but again, you'd have to have co-conspirators, you'd have to have records that pointed you to those individuals, and you'd have to have guilty parties. And I don't know that the federal government has really gotten that far down the road. He was only charged and arrested in July this year. Time has flown by, and in a month he is no longer alive. You know, you are exercising whatever restraint you can about talking about Jeffrey Epstein's death. And I mean, we can all point to things that don't add up, things that don't make sense, procedures that should have been followed. The latest explanation is a simple personnel shortage. They were not fully staffed there. And so certain things that should be done didn't get done. And you know, in the absence of real proof, usually those of us who are journalists won't allege a conspiracy. We might ask a lot of questions, but we won't allege a conspiracy. Now, there's a person occupying the Oval Office right now who exercises no such self-restraint, and rather startlingly over the weekend took it upon himself, first of all, to retweet the tweet of a guy who professionally is a comedian but is apparently being serious about this, ascribing, first of all, raising questions about that anybody would raise about Epstein's suicide, but then trying to pin it on the Clintons. It's a fairly unusual thing. No, I mean, not that there's anything that isn't unusual every day here, but for a president to be retweeting something like that about a former president? Yes, another of the firsts of the Donald Trump presidency. We have never seen that before, and I don't know that we'll see it again. I think it's also really interesting for Donald Trump to be, for two reasons, for Donald Trump to be tweeting and sort of stoking the fire of that particular conspiracy. One, Donald knows that he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein and had been gawking at young women with him, and there's video evidence of that. He knows that there are people who think that he was close to this guy and they must have partied and done some of the same things together. And he disputes that and says it's ridiculous. So in one sense, he's trying to get out front and say, it's not this president that's in trouble, it's another president that's in trouble. So that's first. The second thing that's interesting about him doing this is he's stoking distrust in, he's stoking evidence that doesn't exist. There is no evidence that the Clintons whacked Jeff Epstein. There are serious questions, as you and I have discussed, about how this person could end up dead. There's no evidence at all that there's a particular foul player. There are questions about whether foul play happened. And, in a way, I find it fascinating the way the president stokes conspiracy theories, because he has often said that you can't trust your government. Over the weekend, a lot of people, smart people, journalists, lawyers, former prosecutors, scholars, were talking about whether or not they could trust the Attorney General to properly investigate Mr. Epstein's death, whether it would be a cover-up or whether it would be a question. People on television were asking me this question. And part of the reason they do is because the president himself has encouraged people to distrust our Justice Department and the FBI and question their motives and they're political in what they do.
Yeah, I would sort of say that the story wandered onto his already very well staked out turf. This is somebody who perpetuated the hoax that Barack Obama had not been born in the U.S. This is a guy who alleged that Ted Cruz's father had something to do with the assassination of JFK. This is one of the people who stoked another story about a suicide, that of Vince Foster, claiming there was something wrong with that. He even dangled the idea there might have been something wrong with Justice Scalia's death. He said Obama tapped his phone. I could keep going, but I mean, we are now kind of on his turf as opposed to his being on some kind of neutral ground. He knows how to talk about this stuff. He's been doing it forever, right?
Yes. You're going to stoke conspiracy. You're going to end up having your own government that askance, as if you can't trust one of the pillars of the rule of law in our country. I'm not saying that I'm on with every single thing that's happened at the Justice Department or every single investigative step that the FBI has taken, but it has had a long and storied career of being above politics and above fear or favor. And if you're going to start saying that, you were wiretapped by the secret, scary intel community and the deep state, then be prepared for the Attorney General you chose to be doubted when he comes out and says, hey, we've done a thorough investigation and this is what we found.
Right. I mean, in a way, the strategy that he's employed over the years, I don't know how conscious and calculating it is, but if you say all these other things about Obama, about Scalia, about Vince Foster, about Ted Cruz's father, if you basically place facts and non-facts on an equal footing, then you have the advantage of being able to raise all kinds of other things that aren't exactly conspiracies, but you can say that there were 3 million illegal votes cast in 2016. You can claim that the body count in Puerto Rico is totally misstated. You can claim that doesn't sound like your voice on the Access Hollywood tape. Maybe somebody put somebody else's voice in there. You're constantly free to spin reality any way you want. But as you're suggesting, the downside is eventually so is everybody else. And so people who now want to ascribe all kinds of complex motives to, say, Attorney General Barr, whose father I think did have some kind of contact with Jeffrey Epstein at a school. But people who want to build up their own stories now, I mean, in a way, you've kind of plowed the ground for that if you're Trump, right?
Absolutely. And it's worrisome. I mean, to me as a journalist, it's extremely worrisome because we have a really high standard for what we put in the paper. I can tell you how frustrated I've been when I think I have a story nailed and I think that the material I have is legitimate and we get beat because our standard is very high. I like that it's high, but later on, it turns out this is actually 100% correct. We're so careful about what we put in the paper. We vet it so thoroughly. And if people are going to distrust our facts, then we're in big trouble. And it's really a hallmark of authoritarian regimes when facts are threatened and disputed by the senior leadership of the government.
All right. Well, Carol Leonnig, I know you're a very busy person today. So, Carol Leonnig, thank you so much, investigative reporter for the Washington Post. Thanks for joining me.
I was happy to be here.
Okay. And I just want to say, if you live in Connecticut, we just talked about an apparent suicide. And having this even in my own family history. I want you to know if you're thinking about this and it makes you think any thoughts that feel a little bit like that. If you live in Connecticut, take a moment, dial 211 and then press 1. If you are outside of Connecticut listening to this and you're having any kind of thoughts having to do with suicide, please, once again, take a little pause and call 1-800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255. All right, so we'll take a little break. We'll come back. We have another strange story from, as Carol Leonnig said, our House of Cards reality. All right, we're back. It's hard to do this on the radio, but occasionally a photo just kind of encapsulates the strangeness of a moment. I think we did do a segment last year about a photo that seemed to capture President Trump's relationship to the G7 summit. It was the one where he was sitting down with his arms folded. Angela Merkel was kind of leaning forward with her hands on a table. You could see the other leaders kind of arrayed around her. There was almost sort of a Dutch master's quality to the composition of the photo, and it really sort of sang about his implacability. Well, we're going to talk about a different photo today with Rhonda Gerlich, the critic of aesthetics at New York Magazine, where she writes a column entitled Reading the Signs for The Cut. She's the author of Mademoiselle, Coco Chanel, and the Pulse of History, and is currently at work on a book about political imagery. So, first of all, welcome to our show. We're going to talk about a piece that you wrote called Surrogate Angels of Death. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Colin, for inviting me.
So this is another photo involving Donald Trump. It is a picture that he and the First Lady posed for with Paul Anchando while visiting the El Paso, Texas hospital after last week's gun massacre at an El Paso Walmart. Paul is the 2-month-old baby whose parents, Jordan and Andre, died while shielding him from harm. The photo went viral, as photos seem to go. Maybe just before we do that, you can give us kind of an overarching theory, the theory about how you, as a critic of aesthetics, try to interpret photos like this one.
Yeah, well, as you know, images and photographs speak far more than the simple description of what they're depicting, right? But in the current Trump administration, I have found that their imagery is vastly more, shall we say, expressive or articulate than anything I've seen before. And the main reason I think for that is, well, there are two main reasons. One is that this is not an administration that is very forthcoming with facts or policy accuracy. So we have to depend on nonverbal communication. And secondly, this is an administration that came to power and stays there via PR. This is a television president. This is someone who knows how to manipulate images. So there's always a lot of information in images, and then there's the unconscious part that seeps out regardless of what the president might wish his pictures to say. This photograph with the 2-month-old survivor of El Paso was especially powerful.
Right. So now let's talk about why it is especially powerful. Trump is standing there flashing kind of a high sign, A-OK signal with his hand. His wife is holding the baby. The baby is in a somewhat awkward position with his head kind of cocked a little bit. His aunt is standing nearby, I think, and his uncle is down kind of at the other end of the row. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say descriptively. We're on the radio, so we can't just show people the picture. Is there anything I'm leaving out?
No, I think that's accurate, although I would add that the baby is being held. It looks uncomfortable, and I think the First Lady is holding the baby at a strange, uncomfortable angle. Right.
Which, I mean, once again, in fairness maybe to the First Lady, if someone hands you a baby for the purpose of taking a photo with you and the baby, it could drive out some of your normal ability to relate to the baby. Already, she's probably aware of the fact that this photo has another reason for existing. It's not a selfie that's going to be somebody's little treasured keepsake on their phone. She's probably smart enough, particularly as a former model, to know this photo is going to go everywhere. So she may feel a certain implicit awkwardness about what's about to happen.
Certainly. I cannot speak to her intentions. I'm just talking about what we see, which is a child straining away from the person holding him and looking grim. And we know the child must be in pain. He's suffered broken bones.
Right. So, in describing the picture of Trump and the G7 leaders, I said it had kind of a Dutch master's look to it. This painting, this picture has, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a nativity quality to it. I mean, a very staged nativity quality to it, but that kind of sense of mother, father, and child, anyway.
Yes, and I wrote about that in my article. Obviously, these are not the child's parents, but whenever you see a man, a woman, and a baby, we're kind of programmed culturally to think parents and child. So it is a family tableau, which makes the picture all the more heartbreaking because, of course, the absence of parents is what rendered this photo possible in the first place. And as I said in the article, this baby's availability as a photo opportunity prop is simply the result of a massacre. And then to place him in this smiling photograph of what looks, at least on the surface, like normal, happy, familial interaction is especially ghastly.
Right. We should say also that, one of the reasons we're kind of having to do this aesthetic detective work is that the press was kept at bay from a lot of what happened in El Paso. They weren't allowed around. And so these images come out, and they are the predominant narrative that we have about what happened there. We don't have a lot of, we don't have Maggie Haberman writing a story about this for us.
No, but I think actually that's important additional information because the absence of the press means that this photograph was staged to the liking of the Trump administration. This is not a random, unstaged photograph. That tells us something, even with the absence of the press. As you said, we have to be detectives, and this tells us that they approved this photograph. It wasn't an accidental snap. Therefore, we are even more legitimate in reading it for meaning.
There's also the obvious inappropriateness of President Trump's expression. First of all, he's not, if we sort of take this photo at its face value, it is the photo of a baby who has very recently been orphaned by a horrible tragedy. And so the president and the first lady are there. The first lady's holding the baby for whatever reason. But the president is not looking at this baby. The president's demeanor and self-presentation suggests that the main focus of the picture is not the baby, but of him, and he's smiling and kind of giving this high sign. Maybe you can talk about that.
Yes, well, many people have noticed the inappropriateness of the thumbs up sign in the face of this tragedy. The president and first lady were at the hospital to comfort presumably survivors, many of whom refused to see them. It is not an occasion for glee or big smiles or an A-OK sign. But something strikes me about this that's important, I think, Colin, which is that what we're looking at is the traces of a horrible tragedy, as you say, and a kind of brittle mirth on the faces of the first couple. And in addition to being disturbing and inappropriate, I fear it's also meant to be instructional at a certain level. That is to say, yes, here we have the evidence of a terrible racist tragedy. Let's ignore it. Let's not look at the baby, as you point out. First couple's not looking at the child. Melania, whatever awkwardness she may have felt, is not cuddling the baby or soothing the baby. Remember, this is a staged photo that they released. This is not accidental photo. So we see a broadly smiling first couple and this baby newly orphaned, and we see the thumbs up sign, and it's as though the photograph is inviting us to feel everything is fine, don't look at the tragedy, just smile on with us through this horrific truth. Ignore the truth, smile despite it. And I fear that is inciting us to numbness and feeling accustomed to increasingly disturbing, possibly even fascistic tendencies in this administration. And I'm very mindful as a student of history that is the most slippery of slopes.
Right. I should say that some of this is reinforced by an article released on the New Yorker website today about the other visit on the same day to Dayton, where the mayor of Dayton, Dana Whaley, talks about visiting the hospital with the president and Senator Brown. And she said that he would go to the bedside of one patient, the president, that is, and say, these people used to be Democrats. Now they're Republicans. And they would be looking at him thinking, this is a victim here. This is not, joking about their political affiliation seems wrong. She describes him in another occasion going, there's a guy in a Rutgers T-shirt, and the president says, oh, did you go to Rutgers? And the guy says no. And there's the woman next to him is trying to talk about the actual trauma she's experienced and how the emotional trauma is almost worse than the physical pain of being shot. And he immediately wheels back towards the Rutgers guy. There's a way in which it's sort of keep your sunny side up, even in the face of two essentially simultaneous mass shootings.
Well, yes, I would say that sunny side up attitude is an additional level of violence, though. That is a real violence, to forcibly ignore pain and insist on that kind of bro talk, superficial talk, is deeply repressive and oppressive, and encourages people to become inured to violence and to ignore pain. I mean, we look to the president for many things, one of which is to model values and ethical behavior for the country. And this is modeling a behavior of deliberate turning away from and trivializing of unbelievable sorrow and physical pain, as you point out as well. And that is a dangerous way to numb a population to increasing violent rhetoric and these ever speeding up gun massacres, which we should not, must not ever start accepting as part of American life.
You know, Rhonda, there's a term called theory of mind. In fact, if I wasn't about to have my senior producer go on vacation, we'd be doing a show and sometime in the next few days about theory of mind. That whole idea of is an individual capable of understanding that other people are fully sentient and can experience similar thoughts and feelings to those that the individual himself has. And it exists within the world of human psychiatry. But I just read a really interesting article about a chimpanzee who appeared to have some kind of theory of mind. But there's a way in which I find myself having questions about President Trump there. I mean, if you're granting full emotional and psychological status to the people around you, I question whether you can do some of these things. You know, I mean, I question whether you can put on a happy face around people who are in considerable psychological, emotional, and physical pain, and expect them to do the same. Go ahead. Yeah.
I certainly agree with that, and I think many of us have wondered the same thing about this president. And I am, by the way, fascinated by theory of mind, and I have been writing about this and the topic of disavowal, ignoring things around you that seem disturbing. But I think we need to also make a leap from this particular president's psychology, whatever his personal psychology may be, and the fact that this is an administration that is sustaining it. You can have whatever oddities or eccentricities in an individual that are balanced nonetheless by a system of checks and balances, of advisors, of other government officials who might be present to advise someone away from these kinds of spectacles. But on the contrary, we're seeing them growing and exacerbating. So theory of mind in this sense needs to be systematized. Do we now have an administration, a government, that does not recognize the sentient qualities, the human feeling qualities of the rest of the population? If they do not, then we are in a kind of psychotic state, and I think we may be approaching that. I'm frightened that that's possible, that complete lack of empathy is now becoming normalized.
Right. I mean, to go back to one of your earlier points, you have a photo that is taken by the administration and approved by the administration. It's of the two the white president and his wife holding this Latino baby after this terrible tragedy in which the victims were all Latinos, and many people ascribe at least some of the atmosphere leading up to the tragedy to his rhetoric about Latinos approaching the border. I mean, the whole thing is so weird and odd and wrong. So deeply, deeply wrong. And then to your current point, some people from the administration probably looked at, 20, 25 photos that were taken that day, had them on a contact sheet or a phone or something, and said, let's release that one. So that's kind of the point you're making now. It's not just Trump, probably. There are other people whose job it is to do the kind of interpretive work that you're doing right now, and they didn't interpret anything wrong about this photo.
Well, either they didn't or they interpreted it as you and I are and thought that's appropriate because, as I said, I fear this is also instructional. You see this tragedy, don't feel, look at the smiling people, look at the thumbs up, everything's A-okay, everything's coming up roses, don't worry about this baby, look, he's being held by the First Lady. That's, to me, the truly horrific possibility here, that it's not an accident, but that this is now a systemic education in numbness and acceptance of terror, of violence, and frankly, of real racism.
Let me just ask you one final question here, Rhonda Garelick. And that is, I don't know, I'm the kind of person when I go to a movie, I come out, I have a lot of theories about the movie. I want to talk about what messages might be inside the movie or how we might evaluate certain aspects of it. And I've discovered there are a lot of people who enjoy that. But there's also a huge class of people, probably on a Myers-Briggs index, they're censors, who just go to the movie and they see the movie and, okay, they saw the movie and they're done. And I would imagine that in a way, that's what your job is about. There are an awful lot of people who simply look at pictures that are distributed by government agencies or by anybody and say, well, yeah, there's that picture and there's the president and he's smiling and there's the baby. And so that's nice. There must be a risk also in our willingness to sometimes passively accept things that are shown to us at face value.
Well, I'm a professor and I've spent many years teaching how to read critically. And I would say that, of course, many people prefer to absorb images and move on, and I respect that. But what I would argue, and what I do argue in my writing and in my teaching, is you're not simply walking away from whatever images you absorb. If you don't talk about the movie, if you don't think about the photograph consciously, it's affecting you deeply at other levels, regardless. So you either are absorbing without thinking the messages you've received and letting them affect you, or you are taking them in and thinking about them and applying your own values, your own critical judgment, and then you can have a conversation about it. To me, that is what citizenry and informed democratic society does, democratic, small d. And I think it's a time right now for all of us to engage that. It's like a muscle, Colin. You get used to using it the way you do running or playing tennis. It's not natural to everyone. Not everybody is interested in the same way, but everyone can do it. And I think we all talk about images. When we see fashions in the street, when we watch sporting events, we talk about what we saw. We can do that with politics, too.
I said that was the last thing, but actually there's one more thing I want to make sure that we made clear to the listeners, which is, a picture like this is, as you say, kind of an advertisement for a point of view. Now, this is a baby who has been separated from its parents by death. That's how Paul lost his parents. They were murdered. But this is all happening right there on the same spot, essentially, and along the same border where children are separated from their parents as a punitive form of immigration policy. And it seems as though this picture is also something of an advertisement. These children, we should say, are sometimes placed with non-Latino care agencies, sometimes fostered out to non-Latino families. So this is kind of an advertisement for that too, right? Look at these two big, smiling, shiny-looking, powerful people, white people holding this Latino baby.
Indeed, it is a frightening parallel to things that are happening at the border. Yes, El Paso is a border town, and we have thousands, we know, of Latino children who are being forcibly kept from their parents, just as poor baby Paul is now kept from his own parents. Yes, different circumstances. I do think we must see it as an analog to what's going on there and a cautionary image.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking time with me. The article is fascinating. We haven't entirely done it justice. So Rhonda Gerlich, the critic of aesthetics at New York Magazine, has a column called Reading the Signs in the Cut, part of New York Magazine. This article is called Surrogate Angels of Death. Look it up. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Colin.
All right, we're going to move along here to a more local story. We'll take a break. We'll come back. We'll tell you about a cherished independent movie theater in Litchfield, which is currently for sale. All right. So first of all, I want to say that today's show has been produced by Betsy Kaplan, our senior producer. Kylan Wolf is on the board, making things sound great. The part of Bill Curry was played by Daniel Day-Lewis. Tomorrow on the show, we have we're going to re-air a conversation I had with Yascha Mounk, a great theorist of governments, our own government and governments around the world. It's called Is Democracy Dying? So unfortunately, we'll follow up on some of the somewhat depressing themes that have been brought up here today. However, let's get depressed about something else, or maybe we won't have to be depressed. We don't know yet. But the Bantam Cinema is a beautiful little movie theater in the Bantam section of Litchfield. One reason I thought of Daniel Day-Lewis is I think the last time I was there was to see The Phantom Thread. On that particular day, the movie theater was packed. I had to sit in the front row. But it's harder and harder to run movie theaters like this, movie theaters that essentially compete not only with big chains, but with streaming services, which are multiplying like rabbits these days. So joining us right now to tell us more about the fact that the Bantam Cinema is for sale, we'll have two guests. Right now we have Doug Richardson, the manager at Bantam Cinema. Thanks for joining our show. Hi, Doug Richardson.
Hi, Colin. How you doing?
Good. So tell us what's happening here. What do we know here about what's happening with this lovely little movie theater?
Well, it is for sale. It's been on sale for a couple of weeks, and a couple of people have looked at it. Nothing definite. That's all I know so far.
And maybe you can say a little bit about what's going on here, because it is. I mean, the theater is an institution. It's a very, very well known place, and it's particularly a place where you go see, not necessarily the latest Marvel Comics universe movie, but in fact, maybe just mention a few of the more recent movies that you have played.
Well, we've had Pavarotti documentary. Right now, we are showing a Chinese-American movie, The Farewell. We had a documentary, The Biggest Little Farm, about a couple trying to start an organic farm in California. We show foreign films and independent films. And we also showed some of the better Hollywood movies. We had Rocket Man, which did well. But, it is difficult now. We are competing with Netflix and Hulu and all of these. It's taking a chunk out of the territory. If people are staying home and watching Netflix, they are not going to the theater. So attendance has been slightly down, yes.
All right. Joining us now also, I think we have right now Sidney Koch. He is the actual co-owner of Bantam Cinema. I don't know why I can't say cinema today. Sidney Koch, welcome to our conversation.
Yes, thank you for attending, Colin. We're very happy that you enjoyed the theater, and so did your producer, I understand.
Yes, Betsy Kaplan's a big fan there. We have a slightly muddy phone connection. I'm just going to put you on hold for a second, and maybe we can clear that up. I'm going to stay with you, Doug Richardson. So, is there a way to know how much you're being hurt by streaming services? I mean, is it anecdotal? Is it intuitive?
Well, anytime a new medium comes along, it cuts into the share of the old media. At one time, television was dominated by the three major networks, and now you have hundreds of cable channels. The networks will never again dominate the field the way they used to. It's not going to put them out of business, but you're never again going to have a show like Ed Sullivan that everyone tuned in and watched.
Right. So, and I think the other thing is people have started to think about movies a different way. I mean, for example, a couple of weeks ago, we were down in New Haven having one of our Friday conversations, and we decided we would focus on independent movies. So we talked about Marianne and Leonard, the Nick Broomfield biography about Leonard Cohen and his supposed muse. We talked about The Art of Self-Defense, a new Jesse Eisenberg movie, and we also, these are very small independent movies. We also talked about a movie called Wild Rose, and one of our panelists who'd been to see Wild Rose said it's really terrific. You should go see it. He said, but it's also going to come up in your Netflix algorithm. It'll come find you on streaming services if you don't see it at the movie theater. And I'm sure you wish that people would never say things like that. But but people think that way now, right? If I don't see it now, as a matter of fact, if they feel it doesn't have some vast cinematic sweep, they may say, I could probably wait for that one.
That's true. We definitely hear that. And the studios are releasing movies now like Roma, which was nominated for the Oscar. That came out on Netflix before it was widely released. So, no one's going to go to see it in a theater if they can see it on Netflix.
Right.
I mean, the studios are hurting themselves, frankly, by doing that. But they released it to a couple of theaters so it would qualify for the Oscar, then put it on Netflix, then offered it as a wide release. And who's going to see it when they can stay home and see it on Netflix?
All right. I plead guilty on that one. Although I'm a big believer of, there are certain movies, and I would put Roma in that category. There's some movies that almost don't make sense unless you see them big. There are movies like The Tree of Life, where if you watch that on your home screen, you're going to be thinking, what is this movie even? What is the point of this movie? Why am I watching it? So I think we might have Sidney Koch back. Hi. Can you?
Hello. Yes.
Much
Sorry
better.
For that connection.
Much better connection. So I don't know. Talk me into buying your movie theater.
Well, first of all, we are looking. It could be a partner as well. I might be willing to hold on to part of the theater. I'm becoming somewhat less active in some of the investments that we have. So we have a wonderful partner. I have a partner from O&G Industries, Ken Mers, who's a minority partner, has been tremendously helpful. And we've kept this theater as I would say, almost a beacon for art and independent cinema for Litchfield County. We are the only one in Litchfield County, and we'd like that tradition to continue. So I wouldn't have to talk you into it, Colin, because you already come to the theater and you know what we have and what we do. And you would be a logical buyer. Would you like to buy
it? You vastly overestimate a public radio host's economic means.
I don't overestimate you or your producer at all. I think you guys are phenomenal. And I don't overestimate the fact that they don't pay you enough. So there's never enough to be paid for work like yours. But that's subject for a different day.
Well, it seems like the kind of job. I used to sort of feel the same way about independent bookstores, and I'd be in an independent bookstore and I'd think, and they'd say, well, actually, we're selling the place in 6 months. And I'd be thinking the same kind of thing. Well, I wish I could buy this bookstore. But these are the kinds of jobs. Maybe there aren't any other kind of jobs, but Sidney, it seems to me that these especially are the kinds of jobs for you and for Doug where if you don't pay attention to every single little thing, every single little detail, then one of those details will go wrong. And the price for that is high, right? I mean, there's sort of almost no opportunity for failure when you're running a movie theater.
Well, frankly, Colin, there's no opportunity for failure when you're running a radio show like yours or you're running a business.
Oh no, we've actually explored the outer limits of failure. I can tell you.
Well, look at it this way: every customer is important. If you have a small independent business, whether it's a theater or any other business, you cannot afford to lose customers. And we try to treat, and that's a very important point you're raising, we treat every customer with respect. And to us, they're the most important person. That's everyone who comes through the door is the most important. We try to show them the films that they would like. We don't show Batman. I heard part of Doug's conversation before. Unfortunately, I had a bad connection at first. And Doug, of course, understands the theater. He understands programming. He understands everything. And he's absolutely accurate. We show the kinds of films that people like who don't want to see Batman. And I'm not taking anything away from Batman or Superman. I mean, they gross hundreds of millions of dollars, and people love them. But we show something different, and we've never varied from that. We had a previous owner who owned this, from whom I bought it, Lisa Headley, and she kept and maintained quality, and Doug can speak to that. He's been there for a long time and done a fabulous job, and we've tried to maintain that. And that I think is very important, and people are loyal. We have a great, wonderful customer base, and they're loyal.
Right.
Very loyal.
We should say lots of famous people like Daniel Day-Lewis, Frank McCord, Philip Roth, Richard Widmark, Sylvia Sidney, Joan Rivers, William Styron have sat in these seats. I've got 10 seconds left. So, Sidney, is the movie theater open right now? Can I go see a movie there?
Oh, yes, you can, and you're welcome anytime. Absolutely, we're open, and we're going to stay open.
All right. That's good news. Let's keep it that way. The Bantam Cinema. Thanks to Doug Richardson and to Sidney Koch. Thanks to Betsy Kaplan, and we will be back tomorrow.
All right.